Fans of history are already aware that previous eras were somewhat more fragrant than we're used to today, and if you've ever been to the Jorvik Viking Museum in York, you might have had a chance to smell it fresh, as it were. Was it all open latrines though? Did Vikings just drop trow and go whenever and wherever, or were they carefully considered rules and unspoken societal standards that you had to follow if you wanted to use a Viking toilet? These are the pressing questions we aim to answer in today's video. So, welcome to the Viking Vault. Viking Homesteads. Well, first things first, they didn't have running water indoors, so any idea about having an indoor loo is completely wrong. Viking houses, or longhouses, were rectangular in shape and normally constructed from stone or timber. They were long, narrow spaces with a central hearth in the middle of a large open room. This fire would be used both for cooking and eating, and the walls would be lined with platforms that people used to both sit on and sleep on. Almost all of the daily household activities happened in this one room, so it wasn't a conducive place to go to the toilet in peace. From literary sources and looking at the Old Norse language, we can see that Vikings actually used a number of phrases to talk about the toilet, which included yard house, house of rest, and the other house. All of that indicates that the outhouse was a separate space from the main house. The concept of a home in the modern day is incredibly different to what a home was in the Viking Age. Our view that a home is a single building where everything happens isn't the same as how Vikings would have lived. A Viking family would have split their time between a number of different locations, and their toilet was no exception. Although Viking toilets weren't integrated into the longhouse structure, each settlement would have had a variety of different buildings including longhouses, pit houses, and outhouses. Viking outhouses would have been small structures over a pit or trench that would catch the waste and either funnel it away or be covered up. These structures often involved a wooden seat over the pit, so at least you didn't have to squat whilst doing your business. This did mean that Vikings would have had to brave the cold every time they wanted to spend a penny, and as well as needing to go to the toilet outside, getting washed would have also been a very cold experience, as most Vikings would likely have washed in a bucket or the nearest stream. It's important to note that not every family would have had the funds to build a dedicated outhouse, and it's possible that the poorer families simply dug pits or threw their waste onto the fields. The archaeological evidence is patchy when it comes to porcelain thrones, as you'll discover later in this video. The oldest toilet in Denmark. Viking toilets remain of great interest to modern scholars. Understanding the social norms around going to the toilet can tell you about traditions and how society might have functioned, while studying the material remains can tell you how Vikings would have eaten and what sort of illnesses they faced. However, it's very difficult to track down what a Viking loo would have looked like, since, until recently, most archaeologists didn't really give a weren't really that interested in Viking toilets. In recent years though, investigations at a Viking settlement seems to have shown up the oldest toilet in Denmark, a 2-meter hole that contains human feces. The interesting thing about this loo, aside from the fact that nobody was looking to find a toilet in that area, is that the discovery turns certain assumptions about Viking toilets on their head. While toilets are not an unknown part of Viking and medieval life, it was generally assumed that this sort of privy house was normally found in urban environments. This toilet was found in the countryside in a small settlement. Previously, archaeologists had assumed that people would go to do their business in the midden or with the animals to use their waste later as fertilizer. But this toilet seems to show that even Viking farmers like a comfortable loo. Unfortunately, their appreciation of comfort didn't extend as far as toilet roll. Bearing in mind that Vikings didn't even use paper to write on, it's not that surprising to discover that they didn't use it to wipe with either. Vikings weren't filthy though, with many writings of the time remarking on their attention to personal hygiene and general desire to keep clean and well groomed. So instead of toilet paper, Vikings would have used natural materials to clean themselves off after using the toilet. Things like moss, wool, grass, leaves, or even small stones. It also seems like the Vikings may have employed a rudimentary bidet system, using water to clean themselves after the toilet, although not so high-tech as the heated ones you can get today. Cesspits. When the archaeologists discovered the ancient toilet in Denmark, they were actually looking for pit houses, which are semi-subterranean workshops, and stumbled on the ancient toilet by mistake. This indicates that toilets may have resembled these workshops, being small buildings located in the settlement near the main longhouse. With over 1,000 years between then and now, it's easy to understand how a toilet might be confused for another small building if there's none of the associated equipment like a toilet roll holder or a shower to make it clear what you're looking at. In more urban settings, the concentration of humanity in one small place meant that there was lots of human waste, which meant that a decent sewage system was needed. This led archaeologists to only look for toilets in towns and villages, but in fact they may simply have been blinded to what was before their noses. Thousands of pits from the Viking Age have been excavated and logged, but perhaps some of these are actually Viking Age toilets. In towns, the archaeologists knew what they were looking for and could often smell the remains. But out in the countryside, feces would decay differently and so confuse the archaeologists. To avoid everyone from being able to see your toilet waste, Vikings also constructed fences around the cesspit to help you keep a modicum of dignity. Even if the general public couldn't watch you while you pooped, toilets were a communal area, just like saunas are today. These shared toilets were either dug directly over a pit, or had trenches beneath the hole that would carry the waste away from the main home. Loos on a ship. And for the question you didn't know you wanted to ask, how did Vikings poop on a longship? As we all know, Vikings are seasoned travellers at sea, but operated under sail and oar. There were no speedboats in the 10th century after all. As a result, Viking voyages could last for many days or even weeks depending on where they were headed. And so what about the toilet situation? Well, it depends on the ship and the trip. It seems that Vikings would normally have used a much larger cargo ship called a nar for their longer sea voyages. It had a deeper hull than a longship and was more stable for carrying cargo across the North Sea. However, even this ship doesn't appear to have had any dedicated space for a toilet, and as such we need to make some educated guesses about how Vikings would have relieved themselves. The most likely answer being straight over the side of the ship. As humans though, we love to experience everything for ourselves, and archaeologists truly love doing this. In 2007, a replica ship called the Sea Stallion set sail from Roskilde to Dublin to see what life aboard a Viking ship would have been like. According to the crew members, there were 2 toilets on board the Stallion, one underneath a couple of planks in the bow and another one in the middle of the ship hidden behind a small canvas. Both of the toilets provided to the modern day crew were essentially buckets that you'd use, then thrown overboard before resetting for the next crew member. The crew did remember the feeling of freedom as you could go to the toilet and enjoy the view, so long as you didn't mind making eye contact with your crewmates from time to time. Triona Sorensen was one of the people who took the trip from Denmark to Ireland, and her experience was that fair weather meant just going over the side as it was quickest and easiest, but in rough seas that was a different story. In that case, she said they'd use the bucket before emptying it over the side. However, going to the toilet was a challenging affair either way for women, as they don't have the same equipment to make going to the toilet in the cold and wet a simple or speedy process. Recreating the aroma. One of the most unique things about going to the Jorvik Viking Centre is the smell, especially in the summer. York was a Viking settlement in the 9th century, and so imagining this medieval metropolis is evocatively done through one of our most emotive senses, our sense of smell. The Jorvik Viking Museum took full advantage of that to release 2 scent kits that would embody the smellscape in York over 1,000 years ago. One of the kits, called the Thrall Kit, included smells like fish, tallow and candle wax, rotting meat and sewage. At the Jorvik Viking Centre, there is even a model of a man sat straining on the toilet with accompanying aroma. While we can always make a good guess at how things would have smelt, we can't always be sure of exactly how something would have smelled. Or can we? It turns out that the site at Coppergate that the archaeologists uncovered and which formed the basis of the Jorvik Viking Centre was so well preserved that even the smell was as fresh as the day it was covered up. The organic waste that would normally rot away over time was kept fresh thanks to the waterlogged soil around Coppergate, meaning that the wood, cloth and leather products all survived the centuries until they were uncovered. The same was true for other organic matter, the stuff that normally gets flushed away. As the archaeologists worked their way through the millennia-old cesspit for traces of food, bones and more, they got to experience the full force of the aroma firsthand. As gross as that seems, it did mean a wealth of information about Viking diet and health was uncovered, and the archaeologists working on the site were able to consult on that unique cesspit scent. So to answer those burning questions you never wanted to ask in the first place, Vikings did have dedicated spaces to go to the toilet, but it doesn't seem as though there were extensive rituals or societal practices around personal hygiene in the Viking Age. Viking toilets are far more commonly found in cities and larger settlements where archaeologists can locate the Loos by scent alone, but it's possible that we've just been overlooking rural toilets since their construction is very similar to other small buildings like workshops, and they don't stink as badly. Thank you for watching this episode of the Viking Vault. Please do subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying these videos, and I'll see you next week for another one. Have a great week. Cheers.